audit. I just want to thank everyone for coming and also thank the public for coming. This is April 15th Drainage Mitigation Study Work Group meeting. And I'm going to have a few comments in just a minute, but I'm looking at possibly this is our last work group meeting. And we'll pass some information on to the council, but I'll get into that in a little while. Mr. Henderson, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Fitzgerald. Ms. McNair-Prey.
Yes.
Mr. Marone.
Present.
Mr. Gould.
Yeah.
Mr. Bellisario.
Here.
Mr. Thibodeau.
Here.
Dr. Martin.
Here.
Ms. O'Brien.
Here.
Mr. Lagarde.
Here.
Mr. McHugh.
Here.
Mr. Allen.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you, sir. Okay, next thing you have on the agenda is the chairman's open remarks, and I'll go through that right now. Committee members, I'd like to personally thank each and everyone for giving your time and your experience and your expertise to this work group. I know it's a very diverse work group, and that's the way it should be. And I really appreciate that. And the residents of St. Tammany Parish do. Development is an important for our parish, and a resolution to Ordinance 6066 is important for our residents. As I said before, this is the first step we are taking, and it's only the beginning of a process of change, but I believe it's a very important step. In the interest of transparency, after tonight's meeting, all members of the council will receive minutes of all committee meetings, a guide to view our public meetings, which were recorded. Most importantly, they will be provided with all ideas, amendments for how Ordinance 6066 could be amended that are presented here tonight for their consideration as they move forward in this first phase of a very complex issue. I'd also like you all to know that I'm considering calling a special meeting of the council for discussion along with public input before it comes up before the council agenda, for the council agenda. If the opportunity for public comment arises through either a council meeting or a public meeting, members of this committee, please realize that speaking time will be governed as any other special meeting and will not be open as it normally is when you come up to the podium to speak. In closing on this important issue, I'm closing on this important issue with the note that kind of disturbs me a little bit, but I'll just read what I have. At last March 12th Planning and Zoning and April Planning and Zoning meeting, the work of this committee was discussed by Mr. Allen and Mr. Martin in relationship to possibly delaying the vote on a zoning case. In hindsight, I probably should have requested that everyone refrain from discussing this important issue until our business has been completed. That's very important, completed. Just because we come up with ideas tonight, and if there was a planning and council meeting, a planning and zoning meeting tomorrow night, there would be no ordinance passed. So to have an issue discussed there, I think was a little bit premature. Either way, please remember that the purpose of this group is to provide information and recommendations to the council. As of now, we do not know when the vote will come before the council, and certainly cannot predict the outcome of the vote at the council. So it's unfair to bring that up and ask for a postponement of a case that was being heard, no matter what case it was, and say that there may be something that would come forward. So I was reviewing that because I had a couple of issues in District 4, and I saw that, and I just had to say that. Okay, what we'll do now is meeting procedure. What I'd like to do is start from a little bit of the beginning and work all the way to the end. What I would like is everyone here who has an opinion, an idea, a suggestion to any amendment or their own amendment that they want to put forth, let's discuss it, let's take it down. I want to take all that information to the council so that the council can make a very, very informative decision. But once again, it will take some time for the council to do that. We know how the council goes, and it just doesn't go overnight. So, Mr. Fontenot, what I would like you to please discuss, the proposed amendment as it's written and presented to the work group when we first started this. And I know we've been through it a few times, and you could probably spit it out very fast, but I just want it very short and sweet, if you don't mind, and we'll get it going.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to start off, the present regulations in the ordinance required or were established at two separate times and require the volumes for flood mitigation and for 25% reduction to be calculated separately and provided separately. This has been the practice since actually before the adoption of the ordinance in 2004. There was one case in 2003. I assume it was a negotiated mitigation, and then subsequent subdivisions from 2004 on had separate volumes calculated and provided. They could be in the same pond, but they were not allowed to utilize the same space, same physical space. There was a period of time, as we've discussed, where there was a lack of consistency on that part. We do not believe that that is reason for us not to maintain the separate volumes based upon the existing ordinance. In the last 2 years or so, the staff was approached by both, for lack of a better term, the activist community, people who were concerned about flooding, about some changes to the ordinance, and we were approached by the development community on the ability to combine these two volumes into a single physical space. We maintained our position that they were separate and needed to be provided separate. We suggested to both parties that they approach the council for clarification or changes as they deem necessary. We don't believe that that happened, at least we were not aware of it happening, and therefore there were no changes to the ordinance. After the extended period of time of having the same discussions, we decided to move forward with a suggestion, an amendment, whatever you want to call it, in order to bring the party, the decision, get the clarification in the public realm so that we could be sure what was the intent of the council. Whether it was the original intent back in 2004, or did the council wish to change their intent? Either way, make it more restrictive, make it less restrictive. We just needed clarification on what the intent was. And that is how the ordinance 6066 was developed, as a very simple change to put it into the public realm. It did allow them, that verbiage did allow them to be utilized in the same space physically, and we'd still have the separate calculations, and the larger of the two volumes would have to be met, but obviously there were some concerns about that. This committee was formed, and we've been holding the meetings. That basically summarizes where we are, as we've discussed over the last 3 meetings.
I have just one question, Sidney, and if I remember correctly, when we started discussing this, and I think I may have asked you if we have one pot of water here and another pot of water here, and in almost all instances, it's going to be okay. But there is a possibility that there could be, if we had a lot of rain that filled up the pond and more water came down, if we put everything into one, that we could have flooding out of that.
I think the concern is, and I would agree with that after discussing with engineers, both private sector and public sector, that, they could accommodate it in many scenarios, probably most scenarios, but I haven't had anybody been able to delineate what the percentage of that would be. Would it be 1% of the time? Would it be 5%? Would it be 10%? I think that, as we've discussed before, basins, rain events, just the lay of the land is so, there are so many variables involved, it's almost impossible to pick an exact number, because that number will depend upon what the project is, what basin it's in, where it is in that basin, and what the rain event is. So there are just so many variables that it's hard to lay down exactly what that percentage, that chance of both events happening at the same time would occur.
Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Fontenot on this one? Seeing none. Okay, thank you. Mr. Fontenot, would you please, everybody's received by email and also copies of Mr. Fontenot's changes or his ideas to possibly change the amendment to ordinance 6066. And just for informational purposes for everyone on the committee, I asked Sydney to prepare some changes after listening to the expert opinions presented to this group, as it appears the one-size-fits-all approach may not be realistic, what we are looking for. So I asked to have more information. As I said, this is just the beginning, and I asked to have more information. So I had asked Sydney to look at that. I didn't tell him what to write. We didn't discuss it, but I just asked him to go ahead and look at it. So, Sydney, would you please go ahead and discuss what you have, sir?
Sure, and I'd also like to note, there were other members of the committee who kind of informally asked me the same thing. Said, what do you think? What are our options? And so, in light of that, and after our last meeting, decision was made that we would go ahead and provide suggestions based upon what we heard at the last meeting, that there are those scenarios where we may need both a technical decision being made on whether or not an ordinance is applicable, and then with a different burden of proof, for lack of a better term, a situation where somebody needs relief. And so first thing that we noted was that section 115.3, this present section, is problematic on a number of levels, not so much the way it was written for the purpose it was written at the time. But we feel that section 3 is not as visible in the ordinance as it could be. There are times when we go through the ordinance looking and say we can't find it, we know it's here. And the reason I think is because when you talk about the appeal, it's buried in the middle of that paragraph, that single paragraph. And so we felt that at very least we needed to put something in there that brought it to everybody's attention more readily. So essentially a lay person could go in there and find where the appeal process is. Secondly, it's limited to a very specific question, and that's the question that is addressed in part of the four sections that we suggest you may consider, and that is this ordinance applicable to this site? It's more of a technical decision by the parish engineer as to whether this ordinance is applicable to the site. You do get those kind of questions. It's not asking for relief, it's saying it's not required for my site. And so what we've done is identified two separate types of review and two separate types of development, which gives us four scenarios that you see in the ordinance. The two types of review are a review of the decision of, in most cases, the parish engineer. It really could be any staff member, but ultimately, many of these decisions fall upon the parish engineer as the final say. And it is for a request for relief. And that would be the situation where, yes, it applies to me, but because of the unique scenario, the unique situation that I'm in with my piece of property, it becomes difficult to do or impossible to do. And that's the scenario you saw Sean Burke present to you last meeting, where we have a property that I think everybody agrees, or almost everybody agrees, is really, really difficult and maybe impossible to develop under our strict interpretation of the rule. And so what we've suggested is you have those two types of review. You also have two types of development. That's the individual lot and the subdivision, the major subdivision, what everybody considers subdivisions. Individual lots would be a situation like Mr. Burke's example, where you have one lot left in a developed area, and we need to address that lot. And the second one would be a major subdivision that's already going to the Planning Commission, and you can have these decisions made at the Planning Commission. So essentially what we did is break those two types of reviews and two types of development into four scenarios, with the first being review of decision for individual building sites. If Mr. Burke had come in with that piece of property and said, it's not in a floodplain, it doesn't apply to me, his appeal would go to the Board of Adjustments. That would be a review of decision for an individual building site. It's located right on the edge. There's a dispute of whether that piece of property is located in the floodplain or outside of the floodplain. The second one would be which is more what Mr. Burke's property is looking at, and that is review for relief for the individual building site. And on the review for individual buildings, you'll see we have review by the Board of Adjustments and the same, I believe we kept the same 10-day time period. And so that's the project can keep moving forward. The decision's made, they get a letter saying this applies to you. They have to apply within 10 days to appeal that decision. That is standard in BOA in cases, so that things can't linger on. You can't have appeals of an issued permit 2 years down the line. It's either 10 days, 30 days, 60 days, whatever the legislative body deems appropriate. And the second one is a situation like Mr. Burke showed us, where everything else is built 3 foot up and it's isolated. The rules apply, but they need relief. And in that, we propose, one of our concerns is that if we have no guidance for that decision to be made, you end up with a situation with the Board of Adjustments or the Planning Commission asking the question, what do we make the decision on? So we've made 3 suggestions here of what the decision could be based in. And that's the unreasonable manifest hardship is created by full compliance with the requirement. The second one is the proposal is consistent with surrounding properties and will not create an adverse impact on those properties. And the third is that they find some other alternative solution or mitigation that's satisfactory to the board or commission. And then we have the same questions on major subdivisions, with the difference being we have a specific subdivision process, we have advertising, we have the public hearings all in place. These two, either the review of decision or the request for relief, that decision would be made at the regular preliminary hearing. This is the hearing where the engineering is already done, all the information's there. Next step is complete your drawings or your calculations and get your work order. And at that time, you should have all the information that the Board of Adjustments or the Planning Commission can make that either one of those decisions, whether it applies or if it clearly applies that to provide the relief or not provide the relief as the decision is made. I had one more thing I wanted to touch on, and it just left. I'll think of it in a second. And so that's essentially what the suggestions are, is that we have the 4 levels based upon what they're doing, the size of the development. It would go to one of the 2 bodies. I knew it would come back to me. In the past, we've had similar situations where there was a concern by the Board of Adjustments in particular, because they don't have regular engineering support at their meetings, that they did not have the expertise to make that decision. One of the commitments that I've made is, and I actually wrote it into here, I believe. If not, we would make sure that it is written in, is that the staff in the development department, the engineering staff, will be at those meetings. We do it now with zoning, we do it now with landscape questions, we do it now with anything that goes to the Board of Adjustments. We will have the engineers there to give a recommendation and do an explanation of any technical issues that the board or commission may need. Thank you.
Sidney, a couple of questions, just for people that may be watching or will watch. Who sits on the Board of Adjustments?
They are 5 members and 2 alternates that are appointed by the parish council. They're citizens.
Okay. And how often do they meet?
They meet once a month.
They meet once a month, irregardless of,
Every month, if there's a case, they will meet.
okay. Is there any appeal, if someone goes through this process and follows what you're saying, it gets to the end and it's turned down or it's approved, is there an appeal process that they could come to the council and someone could appeal that and have a ruling of the council?
We would follow, as it's suggested here, we would follow the standard appeals, which Board of Adjustments goes to 22nd Judicial, and the Planning Commission goes to the council.
Okay, so it would operate the same way, is what
Yes.
you're saying? It would operate the same way?
Same way we do on zoning questions. Zoning, Board of Adjustment inquiries go to the 22nd Judicial, and the zoning commission decisions go to the council.
Okay. Mr. Balisaro?
I just want to bring up something that Sidney brought up with the two cases that Sean Burks presented. I met with him over a week and a half ago and two engineers to look at this project. I'm very familiar with the lot. You look at it, you have to go back in time almost 30 years to see the passage of time and then building based on different sets of regulations. You see this hole because all around it, the land was built up. Some of the parcels don't even have a drainage system to take the water to Gauze Boulevard or to Crossgates Boulevard. And some do, some don't. And some are directed in another direction when it should have been going in a different direction. I'm still trying to get a resolution through engineering on what is the solution to fix the problem. Because it's adversely affecting different residential homes. Because this was done over that entire span. It gets into the into the phase fives, which are 6 of those phase fives in Crossgates. There's several homes. And I've looked at that property, and I sat down and listened to them talk and what they wanted to do, and Sean was correct when he was here, that this is one that's got to go through, and we have to have engineers look at it, because all the land is built up around it. And you have some of them where one piece of parcel of land was allowed to go on to the piece of property without anybody's knowledge. They needed some extra room for a handicap spot, so it is built onto the piece of property. So it is an absolute mess. And the only way to fix that is to run it through the BOA, have engineers look at it, see what is the best solution. To me, what they're putting together is a reasonable solution. And what they're gonna do is take the water to Military Road, to that drainage culvert there, which is the best way. It's the shortest route. Some of what was done in the past took the rainfall to the back end of the property adjacent to the subdivision. So to me, this, I think, is going to be a good example of what's going to go through the BOA that's proposed on this sheet of paper.
Thank you, Jane. Ms. Pry?
I'm just wondering for clarification on the individual building sites, that covers commercial and industrial as well?
Yes, ma'am.
So what if it's like a multi-acre, a 10-acre or 50-acre building site for an industrial area? That's still considered an individual?
It would still be considered if it's not going to the planning commission already. 50 acre, any site being 50 acres would be a large site, but there is no time when a single lot building on 50 acres would go to the planning commission. Planning commission handles subdivision of property.
Okay, so that would go, who
That would go to the
approve?
Board of Adjustments.
The Board of
That is a
Adjustments.
by right use, and appeals on by right uses would go to the Board of Adjustments essentially. If they're subdividing the property, creating infrastructure and roadways and all that stuff for the subdivision of the property, that would go to the planning commission. It's already going there through the normal process.
Okay, let me understand you. So if it's an industrial site, say a 10-acre industrial site, does this ordinance apply at all?
If it is located in a floodplain, and again, this ordinance only applies in things in the floodplain.
Right.
If it's located in the floodplain, they have a fill mitigation situation that they have to deal with. The fact that it's one lot, the fact that there's no difference in the ordinance right now on fill mitigation on a one lot, 1 acre parcel, like the examples Sean showed us, or a 100-acre parcel. It all says if you're in the floodplain, you have to mitigate the fill. It's much easier on 100 acres. So on 100 acres, you may not be able to have the manifest unreasonable hardship. You know, you may not have that hardship because you have 100 acres to work with. When you have half an acre, 1 acre, like Mr. Burke often does now, being a surveyor in Slidell, an engineer in Slidell, it gets extremely difficult to make those accommodations.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Okay, seeing no one. Sydney, what I'm going to do is, as I mentioned earlier to the committee, Dr. Martin has some, like some amendments to this one, okay? So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to go to Dr. Martin and see if he wants to go ahead and we'll discuss this whole one, Dr. Martin, if you just hit yours on, sir, and then we'll come back to it. You got it? On the bottom, sir. One that says away. It's not working?
Done. Mic on.
There you go. Oh, now you got it. Oh, yeah, there you
No,
got it.
mic
Now
on.
you got it.
I'm here. I'm here.
Now you got it.
Okay, I'm good.
Go ahead, sir.
First of all, I want to apologize to y'all. I didn't realize I was getting out of line, and I certainly will rein in some of my enthusiasm where I'm not stepping on toes and getting out of line. I've got a lot to learn on this. What I have, and Sydney and I were talking about this prior to that, is when we go into these discussion and request for relief part, when we're talking about the first suggestion that we had for the individual is an unreasonable manifest hardship is created by full compliance with the requirement. That was the statement in there. And to me, that is so vague that basically anybody, anywhere, in any circumstances, could say, well, you're not letting me do it, and it's a hardship on me, and therefore would proceed to the next step. It seems like that opens up an unnecessary bucket of worm. It's so subjective that could fall into anything at all. And that was the only one in reference to the individual that I thought perhaps needed to be changed. I know you wanted to get, as you told me earlier, you wanted to get the 10-day appeal thing in, but that was an objection I had to that particular line in the individual.
Sydney, would you explain that, like you explained it to me a little bit earlier?
That language is, or similar language is pretty standard in BOA situations. That is one of the things they look for. We have it in some of our other ordinances. I believe it is in the sewer, water and sewer ordinance. There's similar language where there's some discretion based upon the fact that the cost outweighs, it's a judgment on whether or not the cost outweighs the benefits and whether it's reasonable to ask the person to bear those costs. If there's better language, we're not tied to this specific language. If there's something that makes the committee more comfortable, I don't think we'd have an issue with it. If we had that 100 acres that
Right.
that we were talking about, and they're building on 10, I don't think it may be a hardship, but is it an unreasonable manifest hardship that to provide the fill? I think that would be a hard case to make. I think
Yeah.
the case that Mr. Burke brought to us is a pretty easy decision to make on that case.
Right.
As to whether or not it's unreasonable to have somebody where essentially a third or half of their whole property is gonna have to be pond, or they're gonna have to build on piers in an area that nobody else is on piers.
Couldn't, instead of this, allow the information in other parts of the ordinance to give specific situations where the person could say, as in this, and not just, well, that's hard for me to do. That would be, there's too many situations that would come
I
up.
think that's what you end up with every
Yeah.
time you draw, a handful of situations, and those are gonna be the 5, we're gonna let this go. There's a 6th one that everybody comes up and says, that makes sense. And then you're going through the process of amending the ordinance and adding
Right.
a 6th.
Right.
And then 15 years later, you have 42 of them.
Right.
And I can
Right.
give you real world situations, swimming pools and the fencing and how you administer swimming pools. We went down from a couple dozen to about 6, and it took us quite a while to negotiate all of those changes to try to
Right.
get the standards on the swimming pools.
Right. All right, I had the same situation with the subdivision, and even, I could understand that with an individual more than I could with a subdivision. When I say that, a major subdivision, if they say, look, it's going to be difficult for me because we've got an oak tree that we can't cut down or something, but they're fooling with a large number of lots and a large area, it seems like that we could avoid that particular statement in there. And the statement I have was, which, of course, I'm sure you doing this a long time could kill this statement, but the statement I had is to change the unreasonable manifest hardship is created by full compliance with the requirement. And it seems like a subdivision should have very objective things that they must do, and not say, well, gee, that's hard for me to do because I'd have to give up 3 lots or something. I can understand the individual, like the particular lot that was trapped in the building. And the change I was proposing is the proposal is consistent with the surrounding properties, that it would be consistent with the surrounding properties and not create an adverse impact on the surrounding properties, to include as regards flooding, which is of course important, traffic and quality of life issues. That a subdivision does not adversely impact a neighborhood is essential. However, each subdivision must be evaluated upon its own merits, not only as it affects the immediate era with regard to the above issues, but considering any future impact and precedence it may have on the parish as a whole. That's probably too daggum wordy for what you got. I'm probably, yeah,
No, it's not. Go ahead, go
no,
ahead.
it's probably too wordy,
No, you
but
can get it down to.
what you can get it down to
Yeah,
no.
you can get it. cut it down.
But what I was saying is that basically, a subdivision has more leeway than does an individual, and I can certainly understand your example and why we would put unreasonable manifest hardships for an individual. It's just hard to believe that a subdivision couldn't figure this and that, and maybe lose a couple of lots, or maybe have to build a bigger pond or something like that. And that we wouldn't need that particular line in there. Of course, I took 1 line out and put 6 in. Oh, you can tell I'm a neophyte at this.
Sydney, you want to respond? Or?
You can laugh, Sydney, if you want.
I'd leave it up to the committee and the council as to whether they want to keep it in there. I think that a lot of the issues or the concerns in the change are addressed in the other 2 items. Now,
Right. Right.
the ordinance is written, or the suggestion is written as one of the following. It could be all of the following. It could be 2 out of 3.
Right.
And so it could be worded so it's not just the hardship, but if you take the hardship out and you essentially say that if I can be consistent with my neighbors and not flood them, then, I shouldn't have to provide both, both volumes in separately. And if that's the will of the committee and ultimately the council, that's fine, but, you just have that, it's a nuance
Right.
in removing hardship from the question. It's, is that the intent of the council?
Yeah, I guess I was thinking that, when you're speaking of a subdivision, you should be more objective. And, this is the rules. You do A, B, C, and D. And anybody in any subdivision that comes up before you and you say no, and they go, well, that's a hardship on me because I want yes. It just seemed like we could be a little more specific with it. And anyway, particularly because they've got more room to wiggle than would an individual. And like that one lot that's just a hole in the middle of the Slidell.
Well, and that's another reason we suggest splitting them up, because these ordinances largely reflect each other. Each paragraph is very
right.
similar. It could change dramatically based upon whether it's a subdivision versus individual
Correct.
lots. Right now, it has a similar pattern to the structure of the.
Correct, and that's, but thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Martin, and I understand that, I know everybody gets excited and moving forward on those issues, and I appreciate that. Thank you. Mr. Gould.
Sydney, do I need the mics on?
You're on.
Let me make sure I understand this correctly. We've got two separate actions. One goes to the Board of Review, which is going to be a situation where, like we saw last meeting, where there were small pieces of property. I don't think that this language, I don't have a problem with it, the way you have it set up right now with regards to that. I think it handles it. By the way, the very first section under the use of fill materials is adverse impact. So any decision or any approvals that vary from the norm are going to have to prove it, no adverse impact. So I'm comfortable with that language. The second section, which is review of decision major subdivisions, that goes before the Planning Commission, and that goes through a full hearing. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So these items that you have here about unreasonable manifest and all of that, they can present that. But at the end of the day, they still have to be able to adhere to the adverse impact, no adverse impact. Is that correct?
Yeah, and let me answer those two questions or two comments I want to make. The first is, yeah, they would still have to have no adverse impact. And that's why I think what you may want to look at is it all of these or one of these of the three? Right now it's written as you meet any one of them and you're okay. If it could be all of them, it's another option. The second is, and it may be just, you said review a decision. Review a decision is whether it applies or not.
Mm-hmm.
The unreasonable manifest, the proposal is consistent, and agreed party are under request for relief. That means it applies to me, but I don't want to have to do it. I can't do it, whatever the scenario is.
Right.
So I want to make that, we actually have 4 different scenarios, not 2. I don't know if I answered your question.
No, you did. You did. I mean, I think we needed to make the distinction between what, an individual lot having an adverse impact. That's much easier to prove that there's ways to do that. A subdivision, claim an adverse impact in a subdivision, it's got to be a small one, in my opinion, because it's got to be something that's unworkable for them. But, the bottom line is adverse impact. If there's adverse impact, you can't approve it, or should not. Correct?
Right, I mean, that's a standard in land development laws, that you won't have adverse impact on your neighbors.
Right. Okay.
In this
Thank you.
case, with water flow.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. McHugh?
Yeah, mic on?
Yes, sir.
To
Help him out, Ross.
agree with Dr. Mark for one time. I do think Cindy's been doing it a long time, and I think he has good expertise. And I think the way he wrote it is proper. We've dealt with these terms for many years in the past concerning sewage and things like that, so the language that he used is not new to anyone that's in this business, and they've had to comply with it. And then my only other comment concerning Dr. Martin, the Drainage Committee, and I don't think we need to start expanding into traffic. And then he talked about city being vague, but how vague is quality of life? So, I mean, I think Sydney's, the way he wrote it was proper and reasonable. We ought to do it. Okay.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Bray?
Yeah, I think Sydney has a lot of expertise, too. I wanted to ask him that. I had emailed you, and I know it was a time when you were missing the last meeting and everything, but the GDD 5, that stands for Gravity Drainage District 5?
Yeah, and it does not apply to the whole parish. It is a very specific area. Generally,
You're in it right now.
yeah, you're in it right now. What, probably know as good as anybody. What are the boundaries?
It's generally District 5 boundaries.
Well, so this ordinance, does it only apply to GDD 5?
No, right now, under present ordinance, when you do a development in Gravity Drainage District 5, your plans are reviewed by both the parish staff and an engineer who is contracted by GDD 5. So it
Okay.
actually undergoes a second review.
So, I mean, why is that district pulled out? I'm trying to understand why it just doesn't. Or add, yeah, yeah. Why is it separate? Why is it mentioned separately?
Decision was made many years ago by the parish council to grant that district that extra review. And so we just sent it to them and.
How
make
many
sure
other
that they're
districts are there?
I don't,
Sydney, what she doesn't know is, I took GDD 5 after talking to Marty Gould and established the same thing for SDD 1 of GDD 3.
Okay, that
Sub-district
was-
1 of 3.
That was Greek.
So there are two districts, that you have similar provisions, or a district and a sub-district.
Right.
That you have similar provisions in, where they get an enhanced review based upon historical issues with drainage and flooding, and the decision by the council to grant them that authority.
So are all the low areas in St. Tammany in the Drainage District 5 or the sub-district? You don't
No,
know?
it is basically bounded at Beta Springs, south of Covington, almost down to Mandeville.
Goodby's included in that too, I guess?
Goodby would not be in there.
Oh, no? So how would we get more
This
of the
applies
parish
to everywhere.
included?
This doesn't just apply to Goodby.
So, I mean, we would have to have an extra review like this, with this ordinance, we would have to add the other drainage districts
The
to this
council would have to add
ordinance.
them, the other drainage districts, yes.
I would definitely request that we add the other drainage districts so that everything in St. Tammany is covered by this ordinance, not just one area.
Everything is covered by this ordinance. GDD, there are
Okay,
two
then,
reviews. The parish staff will do a full review on this and make a
Okay.
recommendation.
Okay,
GDD 5 also does a review, a separate and distinct review, and they give their comments.
who is GDD 5 then? Who actually does the review?
There are a number of engineers that they use.
Interesting. So they're getting a review above and beyond what this ordinance
Yeah, the
states?
same regulations, but it gives them another look at it.
Okay. Interesting. I think we need to look at, that's,
It's
yeah.
what that area wanted to do. I had to do the same thing on a new project the first year I was in office. And I knew engineering at that time had too many things going on. So I spoke to Marty Gould in my first, and he told me what he had done to make sure there was another review. So I took that, and then working with Terry Hinn way back when, around 2008, 2009, and I created the SDD1 of GDD3 to do the same thing, and our drainage district hired an engineer to review everything. And then they worked with parish engineering to resolve the small differences that existed.
Okay. I still think it would be a great idea to add all of our drainage districts, or, this is such an important issue that involves so many people and all the new building as well as the people who are already here. I think it would be great to have it parish-wide rather than just for special areas.
I made that note, we'll take a look at. Marty, did you wanna give a little more insight on that?
Yeah.
Go ahead, sir.
The mic. Got me?
Turn it on.
All right,
bro.
the way that came about, Gravity Drainage District 5, like the drainage district that Gene has in his district, had a tax. And they were doing projects and improvements. What we found out was that, when somebody comes in, gets approval on a subdivision, they're doing things, and the two don't match up. It became a problem, so there was a need for a requirement. Later on, it became apparent that because of lack of institutional knowledge, we were rolling parish engineers in and out the door every 2 years. There was the review process was not at its level that it needed it to be. So we added in some other provisions, and I'd have to go back and let you tell you exactly what they were. But we added in that review process and just kept it there, because 2 heads are better than 1, and 3 heads are really good. You got the developer comes in, he supplies his plan. The parish engineer looks it over, and then drainage district engineer looks it over. And you'd be surprised how many times they find something, wait a minute, did y'all consider this? Or the parish engineer would find it, that type of thing. And it's worked really well. But here's the problem. You don't have drainage districts all throughout the parish. There are only 2 successful drainage districts, and that's GDU 5 and the district that Gene has. Everybody else, I don't even think they have boards appointed.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Allen?
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to comment that these aren't unreasonable expectations for getting relief, but I do believe, especially for the major subdivisions, that all of them should be necessary to appeal. Unreasonable manifest hardship, that is a very, how should I say it, qualitative statement, and we should have something a little more quantitative, which would be the following 2 proposals consistent with the surrounding properties, and the aggrieved party provides an acceptable alternative solution or mitigation for major subdivisions. You could probably talk me into agreeing to just allow 1 for the individual built home sites, but I think those should also be all together instead of just based on 1 of the 3. So that's all I have to say about it.
Okay, thank you, sir. And I'll get to, I have
Oh, yeah.
yours, and we're gonna go in that one in great detail, like we, do all of them, okay? Let me see. Get 'em all. All right, Sydney, anybody else? Okay, what I'd like to do now is, first of all, Sydney, thank you for putting this together. And so what we have is we have the original amended version that you originally introduced to the council and also this work group. And then we have the new amended version, as I'll call it. I am going to now go to your original one that you introduced and ask you a few questions, because I still have what I'd like to discuss a little bit further is what I have discussed before. And my main issue then and still there now is if we have a major rain event and then we have fills up the ponds and then we have water coming down, we could still have some flooding. And I know we can't sit down and say it will, but it may. And so I introduced last time, or not introduced, but discussed my amendment to it, and my amendment was shall not use that. And in fairness of what I said earlier about the whole process, everybody's information being forwarded to the council, I'm going to stick with what I just said, and I'm going to introduce mine as shall not. We have yours, Sydney, as you introduced to the work group, and we have your amended ideas, which we will introduce. Mr. Martin, if you don't mind, if you want, I can have someone look at it and maybe make one of yours a little bit shorter if you want, that last one. But I'll be happy to do that because, in fairness, like I mentioned to you, I want the council to see what you had to say also, okay? And, but before it gets introduced, we'll send it to you so, you can approve that.
Please do.
Okay? I just want to be fair. Okay. So what we have now is, before us, is we have the original motion, that's original amendment that Sydney put forth. Then we have my amendment to include the word shall not, as I included it, and you have a copy of it, and that will be forwarded to the council. Then we have Sydney's, Mr. Fontenot's amendment changes to the original amendment that he had forward. That will be sent to the council. We also will have Mr. Martin's recommendations sent to the council so people can read that also and discuss it. So that's what we have as I'm sitting here now that we will present to the council. What I'd like to do now is, means we're staying on Mr. Fontenot's, Mr. Allen, would you like to discuss yours? Because I think yours was directed at Mr. Fontenot's changes to the amendment. Is that correct? Yes. Okay. Would you like to please go ahead with yours?
Yes. Okay, the mic on? Okay, great. Like I said, I really do like that there's really good stuff with Mr. Fontenot's appeals process. But we're still concerned that a major subdivision will come in and say, well, you're not going to let us build the total lots we want, so we're not going to make as much money as we want, so that makes us a manifest hardship. And with those types of ideals, that's a sure way to fill in a whole floodplain, basically, which has impacts up and down the system and throughout the parish. So I also want to take into account the smaller individual lots, like the one that Mr. Burke was showing us a couple weeks ago. And it's not easy. Miss Sydney, I have a whole lot of respect for the way you can write. And it took me all weekend, over the weekend and more to try to piece this together by trying to fit it in with existing parish ordinances. So what I'm suggesting is that no variance on the fill mitigation for floodwater storage shall be granted for any zoning density of A3D suburban district, 2 homes per acre or greater. Any variance to the fill ordinance must be only for the proper foundation of the building and be limited to the area under the roof, plus grading to achieve the 3-to-1 ratio for the transition to the natural ground level. No variance shall be granted for more than 1 acre of fill in any circumstance. And really, an individual lot in the middle of 3 acres isn't going to affect the neighbors if we keep it to the roof shed area, et cetera. Also, I've heard issues of people with getting permits for driveway fill. And some people even said they've been asked to do mitigation for a few inches of fill for the driveway. So I'd added in there, which isn't, it's up for debate. Variance for driveway fill may be permitted only up to 6 inches above natural ground level if it is demonstrated the driveway fill will not adversely impact neighboring properties. In other words, back up flood waters onto the neighboring properties. There's still another issue I've seen time and again, and that the FEMA flood maps aren't exact. The flood zone A lines are approximations based on the known contours at the time, and the scale of the maps they use is very large. And I've noticed that a lot of times there's areas contiguous to the flood zone A that are still below base flood elevation, which means that they would be flooded during a 100-year flood, and which also makes it part of the floodplain. And the second part is to include those areas in the calculation for fill, because they are still filling in the floodplains and affecting the natural processes and beneficial functions of the floodplain. And so I'd also like to add, this ordinance shall apply to all areas of special flood hazard defined by ordinance 11531 as the land in the floodplain within a community subject to a 1% or greater chance of flooding in a given year. This includes all areas contiguous to the firm A zone and below base flood elevations determined by FEMA. These areas of special flood hazard are unmapped parts of the floodplain and must be included within any calculation of fill and flood storage mitigation. So and like I finished up, I believe this will allow variances for individual property owners, but also not allow the developers to come in and say, it's a manifest hardship for us not to build 4 or 10 houses out of 500, or 400, however big they're getting now, and be able to impact and destroy the beneficial functions of our floodplains.
Sydney, do you have a copy of that you can, you have a copy, Jay? Yeah, we got it. Okay. I'll let you read it, Sydney, and then you can kind of just give me a little bit of your insight.
I think we need to look at it closer, but the initial concern is essentially what we would be doing is redefining, and we do have critical drainage areas, especially as area of concern, so we try to address the type of issue. But the way that I think we're reading this is that we're gonna have to start doing the calculations, going through the formulas, and create our own version of the FEMA maps in order to catch those extra areas. And I don't know how possible that is. We just don't, no.
Well, can I ask a question,
Sure.
Mr. Fondo? Aren't the subdivisions supposed to submit contours on 1-foot intervals for the whole property?
And that's why I said this is just the initial reactions.
Yeah, and so it shouldn't be that difficult
And it
to
may
get
be
to
just the
that.
wording of it, and you know, and so it's something we'll take a look at.
Yeah.
I just don't want to commit one way or the other until we sit down and talk to the engineers on how difficult, how complex it would be to provide it. If the information's already there, and it may be something that we can do.
Yeah, because as you know, I've looked at a bunch of preliminary plats and all, and I do see those contours on 1-foot interval. So it'd be really easy to identify the area that is below base flood elevation, that is technically part of that floodplain.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm trying to get at.
Well, but see, base flood elevation, I could see some transition areas where because the base flood elevation actually moves up as you move up in the parish, it gets higher. So I need to look at it and see if we can isolate it to a certain size property to see that we can make that assumption or that extrapolation that line should be the same line and not the next line.
Right.
Because you go from 18 to 19 at some point. Now, right in that area, how do you make that transition? And just need to make sure we're making that transition on good engineering.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And also FEMA does put in those lines, so they're pretty much perpendicular to the flow of the river, is the way the flood mapping partners do it. And it would just be extending those lines to the contour that represents that base flood elevation. I don't think it would be that difficult to do. I've actually looked at a few and done it myself, just graphically.
Okay, well, Sydney, what we'll do, if you don't mind, I'd like you all review that, and when we, have our next meeting, and this, once again, this will all be passed on, that staff, parish can give us their comments on any of these things that we have, and you will have them.
Yes, sir.
Okay? Thank you, Mr. Allen. Marty?
Thank you. Addressing Mr. Allen's ordinance, those first two items that you placed, the one about the keeping the fill to the footprint of the house under the roof shed, That's actually in the ordinance, existing ordinance right now. It's General Residential Fill Standards, Section 5B. And then the driveway is addressed in D. So you're already there. You got that. I've never heard of them having to mitigate the driveway unless it had to be an awfully long driveway. That might have been, yeah, because it doesn't, I mean, these ordinances are geared towards regular lots. It sounds like that was a big lot with a long driveway. I hear what you're saying about the, this later section. I think the problem's gonna come in is determining and defending when you get to court, if there's a dispute.
You mean the FEMA flood map?
Yeah, yeah, I think you're gonna run into an issue there, but, you know, let the council consider it. Sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Noted on them that these are approximations.
Right.
And that the actual floodplain is determined by contours on the ground. And that's from, you know, the floodplain management handbooks.
Okay.
I hear you, but I do believe you're gonna have a difficulty defending it from time to time, depending on the circumstances. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Pryor?
Just want to second Dr. Allen's. We totally agree with what he says. And if it does say, it's another section that says that it has to be limited to the foundation area, who enforces that? Enforced by you guys too?
That is supposed to be based on whoever goes out and does the first inspection before they check the slab.
Because I never realized that was part of one of, you know,
Yeah.
and I have seen places where they put a lot more fill than just the house foundation
It
in.
depends on the location. There are some locations where you can fill all of it, and just as long as it drains off. There are locations that you can only do under the roof line of the house. There are locations where you can't bring any at all. Or put it this way, it's extremely difficult to bring any and meet the mitigation requirements, and that would be in a lot of the areas of special concern.
Well, let me ask, something like Pinnacle Parkway, that's one of my pet peeves. I call it the Pinnacle Parkway Dam, you know? And I'm wondering, how is that allowed to fill in like 30 feet, like they put in almost 30 feet of like where the Mercedes dealership is? You
It's
can
not
go
a flood zone.
Oh, excuse me.
Behind it isn't a flood zone.
I've seen the water in there already from the river during floods. And they used to have to close the rest stop because it would flood so
There
badly.
is a large bluff back there that drops 20 feet, 15, 20 feet to the river, and that holds water on a regular basis.
If you look where they put the dealership, that's like about 25 to 30 feet of fill
Is
in
it
there.
is it within the 100-year flood zone?
Okay, well, that's the kind of thing I think is just, if I lived in Flowers Estates, I'd be, you know, having nervous breakdown over them putting Pinnacle Parkway in. So that's the kind of thing I feel like we need to be looking at, trying to not let happen again in the future too, is where someone can come in and put so much fill in that it just causes other people to have ridiculous amounts of flooding due to the stoppage of the water flow. But I wanted to also mention Matthew last, at the Planning and Zoning Committee, made a statement in response to, it was a question, I'm trying to think what it was a question. You were talking about federal requirements, and I asked Don to pull it. It's like a little 2-minute blurb of you explaining about the federal requirements, and I thought that was very good. I don't know, maybe you could set it up a little better, if you remember what I'm talking about.
Don has a clip? Okay. I was opposing this new subdivision, and I wasn't going to bring this up, but I actually never talked about this particular ordinance in that meeting. I was talking about a totally different ordinance, 115-125. And to have me called out because somebody wanted to make me look bad when I was talking about another ordinance, I'm not sure how appropriate that was.
Well, Nobody wanted to make you look bad.
Yeah.
That's number one, okay? If I wanted to make you look bad, I'd take a different approach and talk to you by yourself,
Yes, sir.
okay? But that's not the way I do business.
Okay.
Bottom line is this: I did watch it. It was discussed on the May 12th meeting, and it was discussed on April meeting, okay? And it was both with Mr. Shane's case that up there, and the work group was mentioned by both. Okay? Both. Okay? So we'll move on.
I was talking about an ordinance that states that an actual study needs to be completed when there's no floodway designated for the river, which is a minimum standards for our flood insurance that FEMA requires. I think that's all I really need to say about it. And the actual study requires a backstep program following the regulations of the mapping partners for FEMA. So, that's it.
Well, I want to stay on what we have right now. We're going to take he's going to have his move forward as he has it written, and he'll be able to do that. But what I'm saying is, there's no need to hear it. I mean, I don't have any problem hearing it, but the bottom line is, he has his amendment like we have, everybody else has, and we'll just include it in that. It's included his ideas. But if anybody wants to watch it, I can make a note of it, and when I send it out. Okay. I'm sorry?
We get done, email it to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to email it to the council also. I made a note of it. Mr. Morone.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of comments. I would, I guess conceptually, I don't have a major problem with where I think Mr. Allen's trying to go with it, I guess, but my approach would be different. I don't think that it would be, at least in my view, appropriate to start identifying specific zoning categories, whether A3 or greater. I mean, I think the issue is no adverse impact that Mr. Gould mentioned earlier that's already in the ordinance. And I think that needs to be the overriding criteria with regards to any of this. I mean, it's the adverse impact or the lack thereof. And whether it's on 100 acres or whether it's on a 90 by 140 lot, whether it's commercial, residential, industrial, I think the question is there adverse impact there? And so I wouldn't get caught up in specific zoning categories. I would look at the bigger picture. That would be my only comment on it.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Thibodeau.
Got away from the mic button to come up. It's not coming up.
Don? John. Hit John Thibodeau. It's on.
Okay. All right. So I guess, Sydney, your new ordinance that we saw tonight here, I just wanted to, I read through it and just looking at it, it all makes sense for an engineering perspective for a single 100-year storm event. But it's similar to what we discussed before. Who knows what happens before with other events that could impact that. So it looks like the amendments to me are based on a single 100-year event, so which is less conservative than the prior language than we talked about in the current ordinance. Just wanted to see if that was y'all's same perspective.
Try that one right there. See if that hit.
My initial reaction would be that this is not affecting the 25% reduction calculations. You still have the multiple storm events, if I understood your comment. This is concerning the fill, so I don't see the issue. The engineer might, and I think he asked if you could repeat it.
Yeah, trying to figure out the mics here. I guess one's on. I'm not sure. It doesn't say turn the mic on or off in front of me.
His doesn't come up to say turn it on, Don. Who's? Mr. Thibodeau.
It's on.
Okay.
It's on, we can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, so
There you go, right there. Hit it right there, right there. use
the
this
bottom
one.
right.
Use this one right here.
Okay, all right, that's what I was doing. Yeah, so the language as is, it's very similar to the original language in the real, okay. Okay, thanks. So in the very original introduction that we looked at, it's very similar to that one. So in this sense, it does allow for the engineers to be able to stand up and say, okay, for this 100-year event, you know, the peak is not coming to us yet, or it's already passed, therefore, you know, you can look at the storage in the pond and use that storage in the pond for your flood zone A mitigation.
Yeah, that's correct.
That's right. So in the original ordinance before this, it didn't really account for that. It just says you have to consider the 100-year flood event, and then anything above that you have to count for your detention storage and your flood zone A storage. You have to account for both.
In the original 6066,
Mm-hmm.
I think it said you have to account for both of them, where if your fill mitigation is 100 units, your stormwater detention pond is going to be 100 units, then that's fine. You just have to have a 100-unit pond. If your fill mitigation was 125 units and your stormwater detention was only 100, then you would still have to provide 125 units for your pond.
Right. And that's based on the combination that the pond would be impacted by the 100-year storm event, right?
Right.
Whereas the new language allows, it accounts for where the peak is within the basin, which allows you to have more storage in your pond to be used for flood zone mitigation. Right. So it's, I guess what I'm getting at is that the new language that's proposed is it's less conservative than what's currently in the regulations.
Correct.
But it does allow for the engineering science, which I do respect, to show that. Just knowing the history and how it got to where it is, I think that it was a factor of safety when looking at these basins. You know, we talked about the one size doesn't fit all, but it did allow that factor of safety, given the variety of different storm events that we could have at any given time, that both were accounted for.
John, quick clarification. When you say the new language, you're talking 666?
Yes.
Yes. And that's why it is more conservative, because I saw Dr. Martin go, no, he's talking about the proposal that we made and introduced the ordinance. And that is less conservative than the existing language.
What is this? Paul just gave this to us. I don't know who, this is
Okay.
your suggestion? Yes. Okay, and we haven't read this
Oh, I
yet.
thought this was from staff.
No, we haven't gone over that yet.
I'm sorry.
No, that's from Paul.
Okay. I didn't want to miss the boat on being able to talk about this tonight.
No, we just got this a second ago. So.
We thought this came from
You'll have a chance.
Okay. One other item. On the Board of Adjustments, my recommendation would be to just leave it to 2 and 3. Somebody can say they have an unreasonable manifest hardship, we get that, but then base it on 2 or 3 as far as the decision goes. So your decision criteria should be 2 or 3.
For the individual or the subdivision?
Individual.
Based on 2 and 3.
There's a hardship, you know, it's like, gosh, oh, it's too hard, I can't do it. I was like, okay, so we're gonna let you get by the regulations. You know, it needs to have something, some background behind it to give it some justification of why their decision other than it's too hard or it creates a hardship. It's got to be, okay, it creates a hardship, but it fits with the surrounding area. It's the last lot to be developed. Everybody else built like this. We get that. Or it's the, you know, or there's a way to mitigate it, which is the third item. So that's my recommendation.
And that's for both of them, individual and subdivision.
Individual for sure. Subdivisions, I would strike, yeah, it should be for both.
Okay.
It shouldn't just be a hardship.
Thank you, John. Okay. Okay, seeing nothing on that one anymore. We'll go, we have one more, Mr. Marone. I think you presented one.
This would be the original.
on? Okay. So everybody's not confused, there was a red line. Sorry, John, I thought, after you were talking for a minute, I thought that you might have been talking about this. But so what I would propose, I've redlined here, and the language is, that you see in each of these sections is the same. So there's no difference. It's the same language that applies to each. And this really reflects the comments that I made before about, I believe that we need to look at the impact and whether or not there is an adverse impact. And that's what I'm at least putting out there with this language. Also, I think what Sydney put together is good and certainly has a place in whatever the council might decide. And so what I'm proposing would not be in lieu of that, but I would see the two working hand in hand. I think there needs to be a good appeal process, no matter what the ordinance looks like. But I also think that we need to back up, because Sydney's proposal is just that. It's an appeal at the end of the day. And what we've heard from all of the engineers that came before this committee was that there are different circumstances and that the engineers need to have the ability to do their job. And so I think there should be some criteria at the engineering level, at the review level, so that the project engineer can present his proposal, the parish engineer and staff can review that proposal, looking to see whether or not there is a material impact, and there's some more detailed language here I'll go through, and that there also should be a third set of eyes that would look at it, and that would be an independent review. So I think all of that should take place at the staff review level. And then a decision's made, and if there is any aggrieved party at that point in time, be it the developer, be it a citizen, then there would be an appeal. There would be an appeal going forward in a subdivision scenario to the commission as part of preliminary, and then ultimately on to the council. So, a couple of things have come up tonight. I mean, we've heard comments that say, well, we need to make decisions based on good engineering. I think that came from the table here. We heard, well, the ponds, one pond can accommodate both quantities sometimes, but there's a number of variables for each site, right? So it tells us that each case has its own unique set of circumstances and facts. We've also heard that we need some guidance or criteria, and that's what Sydney mentioned when he talked about the 3 prongs in his proposal. Mr. Gould mentioned 2 sets of eyes are good, but 3 are better. Well, all of those, I agree with all of those comments. And the language that I have here, while admittedly not perfect and will need to be tweaked and commented, and Mr. Thibodeau already has picked up on some of that, because being a good engineer, that's what he does. But my point is that I think Mr. Lorino was correct when he started with shall not. I think that, from what I've heard from everybody, we could probably all agree is the starting point, right? Because in a perfect world, you shall not use that fill. But that's not the end of the analysis, at least in my view. There needs to be room for an engineer or engineers to come in and to make a proposal. So what I have here is that you shall not accept. And then I do my best to set forth some criteria as to what that exception would be. And it would be when the project engineer can demonstrate to the satisfaction of the parish engineer, based on sound and accepted engineering principles, that the use of such fill will not have a material effect on the applicable drainage basin, or that such pond storage volume above the static water elevation or portion of the proposed pond storage volume above the static water elevation, will be unoccupied by stormwater at the time of the 100-year storm event occurs. What does all that mean? That there is no material impact, and that the water is not occupying the same space, the timing issue that we've hit on. And I know that that's a complicated issue, but that's what engineers do. And then, after that, there would be a third-party engineer approved by the parish, paid for by the developer, that would have to corroborate that finding. And if that happens, then the parish engineer would have the ability, not the obligation, he would have the ability to approve the plan. So, and then of course there's an appeal from that decision. So you've got 3 ayes, you've got the ability to have good engineering answer this question, because at the end of the day, this is an engineering question. And lawyers and others can look at it and comment and give suggestions, but at the end of the day, this is an issue that I believe most of the weight should go to the engineers on it. So this is my attempt to step back from the appeal, and I think the appeal is good, but to provide some criteria at that review level that gives the engineer the opportunity to make his case as to why this would work. And if he can make his case, then the parish engineer has the ability to approve that plan.
Okay, Paul, so basically, what you're saying is you would go along with the shall not and with the exceptions included there. Okay. Right. Let me ask you a couple of my questions before I go down. On the third engineer, what would you envision, how would the third engineer be selected, and how do you envision that process working?
Well, my initial thought was that it would work somewhat similar to what we do with the traffic studies, where the parish will establish approved engineers, an approved list. And then the engineer would be chosen from that list. It could be the parish can choose that engineer, and ultimately that engineer would be working for the parish, but at the cost of the developer, much like you have with the traffic engineer.
Okay, well, one of the things that kind of concerns me about that, and I don't know, Sydney, I ask you, I like the idea of the third engineer, okay, to be able to look at something. I'm all in favor of that. But it's kind of hard to pick, in my opinion, when you have the parish and you have the developer, and then you're going to pick the third engineer from St. Tammany Parish, who may have done work with either or, okay? That I'm not saying it would influence his opinion. That's not what I'm getting at. But when you look at this and trying to prevent flooding, somebody could sit back and say, well, that just doesn't pass the smell test. I'll just say it that way, okay? So for me, maybe rather than use someone within St. Tammany Parish, that St. Tammany Parish goes out, and I don't know this, I'm just asking a question. St. Tammany Parish goes out outside of St. Tammany Parish and hires someone to come in, not only hires them, but basically maybe put them on a retainer and use the same one all the time, so that if this comes up a lot, that they're very familiar with it rather than bouncing the ball around. But hire someone outside of St. Tammany Parish, or even maybe the state of Louisiana if you really wanted to look at it. I don't know, I'm just talking off the top of my head right now. But to have that third party, if you're going to bring a third party in, have that third party completely independent and looking at both sides of the issue. And then if you have them and use that same one all the time, they become more and more familiar with St. Tammany Parish. Is there someone out there like that, Sydney?
I think we'd have to look at.
Mr. Reese will be back
There we go.
tomorrow.
I think that you need to look at it from a number of perspectives. It's something you could, we could have people look into. But from the procurement perspective, can you limit who you can respond to the RFP? Which is what it would take. You need an RFP or an RFQ. Can you limit that to people outside of the parish? I don't know. I know you have to be careful on how you handle essentially affecting commerce. And then, you know, it would have to be, I imagine, either a licensed Louisiana engineer, somebody licensed in the state, or at least there may be some reciprocal, the engineers can answer better than I can, some kind of reciprocal licensing recognition between the states. So I think there are a number of technical issues we need to look at. Obviously, if you're going to go with the independent engineer, you want them to be as independent as possible, and that's one possibility.
Miss Emily? And I know that you're getting this question cold, just like I am, but would you see that there may be a legal issue that if we said, if the parish said we want to have a complete engineer, an outside engineer out of St. Tammany Parish, or the state, either or, that there could be a legal issue to that?
I think that there's definitely a legal question that needs to be researched and addressed.
Okay, because to me, I think that's the best way to if we go along with that. In fact, I forgot to ask you, Mr. Marone, this is your amendment. I mean, what is your thoughts on that, sir?
I would absolutely support that. I mean, my language just talks about it being a third-party independent engineer. I didn't really drill down into what you're talking about, but I would agree with that. I think the more independent that the review engineer is, the better it is for all involved. And I don't know about the parish's limitations. I would hope that there would be a way to craft the request for proposal where you would be able to target, you know, engineers that are not actively doing business in St. Tammany Parish, with St. Tammany Parish. And I don't know whether that's possible, but I mean, I think what you're talking about and what makes sense is that you're looking for maybe a large, very qualified engineering firm that's going to be New Orleans, Baton Rouge, Lafayette, one of the other major cities that you don't see in these chambers on a regular basis, but that have the expertise to come in and perform the function. And I would be supportive of that if that's achievable.
Okay, thank you.
Emily, let me bring out, I talked to Mike about it. When I'm listening to all of this, I know under the professional services contract, we have a whole, I guess, a group of engineers or attorneys we can utilize. Is it possible to do that with this? That we get engineering from some outside of the area, have, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 of them, and you would rotate through that?
It may be possible, but I think, like Mr. Marone was saying, the language that you use to craft it, instead of limiting it to a jurisdictional area or an area of the state, to limit it on other criteria, such as their being actively involved in working with the parish on projects, would probably be the way to accomplish that legally.
Would you at least start looking at that for us, ma'am?
I will.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Allen?
Okay, thank you, sir. Paul, I really do love the way that's written, and I agree with it, but I don't think it really goes with the main ordinance. That's part that should be in the appeals process for it. We're losing sight of that. We're talking about an overall floodplain that is, you know, hundreds of square miles possibly. And the smaller floodplains actually respond quicker and in worse ways to these. But what's really happening, an individual subdivision or fill is not going to affect the overall flood heights. It's the cumulative effects of all of these that are going to cause the problems. If you look at the flood gauges, 65% of the last 20 highest floods have occurred in the last 35% of the years that they've been taking data. And what's happened in the last 20 years, we've been developing within the floodplains. So we've been seeing an increase in the flooding for it. So I really do believe that we need to try, the developers or whoever's doing it needs to try their best to fulfill that shall not utilize. And then if they can't do that because of a hardship or whatever other reasons Mr. Fontenot came up with, then this except could possibly come in. But I think that's really well written, and I'm not sure if it's, like mine was really bad. It's a lot better than what I did, Paul. But yeah, I think that's on the right track for getting it settled.
Let me see if so what you're saying, Mr. Allen, is a combination of all of those into the
Yes,
new
sir.
amendment to the ordinance.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
That's
okay.
it.
No, that's what I was trying to get so I can
But
make my notes.
I'm really worried that we're losing sight of the overall floodplain and the river system, which benefits everybody in the parish.
Gotcha. No, I understand. And you know, I'll say it at the end of the meeting, but remember, the first thing we're trying to do is take care of this one. But as I said in the very beginning, in my opinion, this is only the beginning of it. And I think that's, and I'm just saying for right now, I think that's when maybe the whole total, but I have no problem with trying to look at what you said, and we'll try to put something together on that so everybody will read it.
Thank you.
Gene?
Yes. My question is for Paul Marone and for Sidney Fontenot. And what Paul was talking about is had this third-party engineer, however we obtain this person. If there are changes made by that individual prior to it coming to the planning commission, my obvious question is the planning commission members and the public who's there for that particular case to be made aware of that this independent review came up with these changes so that they know that? To me, I thought that it's an excellent thing to do. It shows the transparency of it and shows the involvement so that we can bring forth the best product.
I don't see why you couldn't have indication that changes were made, maybe a summary of those changes by the independent review.
Okay. Paul, you agree? Okay, thanks.
Mr. McHugh?
Going back to the selection of engineers, the parish has a list of accepted civil engineers. It's very long. I mean, I don't see where there'd be any problem finding people. Well, not a criteria you can't say, not St. Tammany, but other criteria you could zero it in to get the same results. And then on the RFQs, isn't there a limit, a dollar amount on the RFQs over a certain dollar, Sydney or Jay? You're talking about this independent review is not going to be $20,000. It might be $5,000, it might be $7,500. I thought there was some limit there. You could, below a certain limit, you wouldn't have to go out for an RFQ.
I think it's below 300, if I'm not mistaken.
300?
350.
Oh, geez. Well, okay, but still, you have a list of engineers that you already have approved as civil engineers. You just want to make the criteria that, like you say, a big firm from out of the parish, probably. And the only other thing is exactly what Marty said. This is your third pair of eyes. Of course, in Marty's district, it'll be the fourth set of eyes.
Well, that's right, that's right. No, you know, it is, yes, the answer to your question is you're right. Thank you, Kelly. Jay? You had you raised your hand? I see you're nice and Watson on my computer.
Yeah.
You don't have anything, sir? Thank you. Ms. Prey?
Yeah, mine's on the selection of the engineers, too.
I'm sorry, what was it? I didn't.
The selection of the engineers.
Okay.
Yeah. I would go beyond just being a civil engineer. I would want somebody who is a water engineer, a drainage engineer, someone who has background in that overall concept of what it means to look at a drainage field and understand what the, just any civil engineer might not have that background or understanding. And we want someone like Mr. Matthew Allen said, that understands the systemic flow of water and what it would do to put a subdivision in the way or to put a lot of fill in.
I can't disagree with that at all. And remember, this is all new to everybody right now. So and I know we can investigate that. First of all, Ms. Couillon has to let us know we can move in that direction, and we'll go there. Mr. Martin.
I was just going to suggest that one of the places to look would be the universities. The professors there, they would seem to be a good source of an independent engineer, and of course they may actually use that for teaching purposes too. So.
Okay, no, that's very, very, very good. Mr. Lagarde, you woke up.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman Lorino. I suppose my question is directed to Mr. Paul down there. And Paul, this is really a clarification. Thank you for drafting this. The last sentence says the cost of which shall be the responsibility of the developer. And Ms. Couillon, this may go into what they were asking you about. The developer's paying for it and the parish isn't. There may not be a requirement for an RFP or any of that. It may eliminate the need to worry about that concern that was addressed a few minutes ago.
No, I tell you
And
what.
Paul, was that the intention?
That, I'd like to say that I was thinking about that when I drafted
But
it.
he wasn't. Okay.
But I wasn't. But if I got lucky and it actually addressed that issue, then I'll take credit for it anyway.
Unintended consequence, but good. Thank you.
Well, I'm glad you woke up and gave us that, sir. I appreciate it. Ms. Couillon, would keep that in mind, please. Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Thibodeau.
Yep. So just, I think this one's on, right?
Yes, sir. You got it now. Okay. You got it.
Good.
Don't worry about it.
So just to reiterate, and I read it a few more times again, and it's the same thing that we were facing 12 years ago, 15 years ago, when some of the original language came out. It's the fact that you're looking at the impact of a development on the drainage basin, and if that amount of floodplain storage loss, will it have an impact or not? I think we've said it before. For one development, it may not show that much of an impact. The question is, what is that cumulative impact? It's going to be hard for any one development to do that without showing the entire basin developing in this fashion. But also, you're still stuck with the impact of how do you account for cumulative storm impacts or storms at different times. And what if your pond's half full and you already got that storage, and then you have rain on top of it, plus you're trying to account for the floodplain. There's so many variables in it. I can appreciate looking at a single event to try to understand it, and that's good. I do, like I said, I do want to reiterate it is less conservative than the current language, but it does take into account the engineering science, which I'll have talked about many times at this meeting. And I think it is a step in the right direction, but like I said, it's hard to account for one development's impact on the basin. If that one's allowed to develop in a certain way, what's the impact if they're all allowed to develop in that same fashion? So, and you got different locations in the floodplain as well, and that's what you get into is when the peak occurs. You also have the impact of coastal, what's the impact on floodplain and the coastal development. I think those are different type developments. So it is a broad issue, it's a big issue. It's hard to put any one answer to it. I think this is a good step towards that, but like I said, it is less conservative.
Let me ask you a question, John. So I forgot who mentioned it. Maybe it was Mr. Lagarde. He might have woke up about something, but if we have an engineer that looks at the entire concept before he comes in and gives his third opinion on yes or no, would that make it at least a little bit better in the right direction?
Depends what storms they're accounting for. I think with the way the fill ordinance was written, it accounts, it doesn't matter when the storm occurs, you have to account for that floodplain loss. You know, so it gave you that extra factor of safety. You know, I think that we had the models built in years past, the floodplain models for just about all the basins, not every basin. That may be one way to do it, is show that impact in a model. That's an expensive and sophisticated way to do it, which I don't think we could afford or have the time to do that for every development. We use those models to come up with these guidelines to give development. That's how a lot of these rules were developed, based off of those. And at the time, it wasn't just an engineering firm doing those. They were actually guided by university professors as well as others. So, and to give uniformity as to how we approach drainage within the parish. I wish there was an easy answer to it. I think the appeals process, maybe that gives some breathing room. I kind of like that, because you can look at some of those special cases. But I just, you know, as the council considers these changes and this board considers these changes, it's not an easy one to answer. You have your current rules, which are conservative. There is a factor of safety, and there is you know, new rules to consider of how that, you know, where do we go from here?
Okay, thank you. We took those all, or those are new?
New.
Mr. McHugh.
Only comment in response to John is, I just think what he's talking about, I certainly agree with him, but that's going to be the responsibility of those engineers to prove that. If they got to do a basin study to show the current land use, and they do it. And the next item comes in, and if you're already developed, then you better show your land use as being developed land. So it's not that it can't be done, it's going to be more expensive. And really, the parish had done some models, so some of those things could be piggybacked on. You could at least look at those numbers, and you could make some approximations. It's a shame that they didn't finish them out throughout the basin, because they did a good start years ago. And all the people that are on this issue of the Goodby flooding, you know, it'd be great to really have a good model of that river basin. And I was at a seminar last weekend, and FEMA has done a number of watershed basin studies, and I don't know if we've checked with them to see if they've really done it, because they did all of the flooding areas of 2016. So there might be that data available already. Now, I'm on the levee district, and we're compiling all the drainage studies in the coastal zone for St. Tammany Parish. But that needs to be expanded to take care of all of the parish. So the people up in Goodby, you'd know when that 100-year flood really is and where it is. And, you know, we talk a lot about that, but those are things we really ought to be looking at. And filling in the floodplain is one thing, but another thing we haven't thought about is BFE. Everybody talks about the BFE. You could always ask the builder to build a little higher than a BFE, because it's really not the fill in the Tchefuncte Basin that flooded Goodby. It was an extraordinary rainfall event, and it wasn't the land above Goodby that's been developed, because there hasn't been any. And it hadn't been developed in Goodby because there hadn't been that much. It was really high water from a bad rainfall event. And if those houses would have been a foot higher, you had a lot less flooding. So those are the things that would be more practical than arguing about this inch of fill here and this inch of fill there. So.
Well, you know, Kelly, you're leading into where I was going to end the meeting. Is I agree that there are so many other issues that we need to look at. And this, as I said, this is just the beginning to keep our process moving. But I think all of those issues need to be number one as we move forward. And I'm say it now, say it again at the end. I hope the same committee will sit and do that when we get ready to do that, because I'm going to try to form the same committee to do that, because I think we have a very good group of people here that can help us, but there's a lot more we need to look at. So I agree with you. Gene?
Okay, this is for Jay. Couple months, less than 2 months ago, I brought up the study that was done by Dr. Cheryl Blaine. If you remember it, and this data was transferred over, and we had a meeting talking about that. I believe Dr. Smythe is the holder of that, and that came out of Hurricane Isaac. And we looked at 3 factors that would hit the West Pearl River. My question is could that type of modeling be utilized for what we're talking about right now?
We do have that model now, but we don't have the computer system, the software, anything to even run that model right now. So we're trying to work with LSU and other.
Yeah, that came up in that meeting, that we didn't have the power and capacity to do that. Have we progressed with LSU at all? Because that seemed to be the solution to it.
Yeah, we've been making progress with that, but I don't know if that would be something that we could do on an individual subdivision basis to have, and that model was also the Lower Pearl River Basin, so
Right.
it wouldn't cover the whole parish as well.
I think it's worthwhile to look at.
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Ms. Prey?
I love the ideas of using universities, because I think that would be really, really beneficial. And also the Watershed Initiative. Have we done anything with them? Have we contacted or any interaction yet?
No, ma'am. What I'm doing is waiting till we get to the next phase of this,
Okay.
of the group.
So then we can
Yes,
work
ma'am.
with them
Yes,
on
ma'am.
that.
Yes,
Yeah.
ma'am.
I'm thinking they can help us with the
Ab-
studies,
absolutely.
obviously.
But once again, that's more technical than what we have right now.
Yeah.
Okay, I know this is technical, but we have to take care of this in a different roundabout way.
Right.
And then get to the other side.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Ms. O'Brien?
Well, actually, I was going to mention the same thing Margie just said. We've got a lot of work with on the watershed that's being done at the state level. They did a great presentation here. They did the same thing at the Police Jury Convention, and they have offered to participate with us in the future, so I think that we should ask them to assist.
Absolutely. Okay. Okay, all right. Seeing no one else, anybody in the public, I know we've been talking a lot, and I probably should have stopped on every one of those things, and I just sat here and thought about it, but would anyone like to come up and just talk to us and give us your thoughts? I'd appreciate it. Yes, sir. Come on up.
I wrote this out in the parking lot. I'm Don Castile.
Yeah, you have to pull that a little closer to you, sir.
I'm Don Castile from Bush, Louisiana.
Hey, Don.
I've been here since 1974. And I wrote this out in the parking lot earlier. My thoughts on it, I came to another meeting. I'm not in blind opposition to progress. I'm in opposition to blind progress. The idea of relaxing flood mitigation codes in the parish is counterintuitive. The fact that slab construction exacerbates the problem. The fact is, clear cutting of a subdivision tract exacerbates flooding because a mature tree utilizes 200 to 300 gallons a day, lowering the groundwater itself. Subsurface drainage, and talking to the hydrologist was here, he said, I wish we could use open ditches. I wish we could. Subsurface drainage limits the capacity of flow, and the expense for adequate drainage in such a system exceeds the necessity. The idea of channelizing the Tchefuncte River or Pearl River is environmentally and fiscally expensive in the extreme. And since the scenic rivers, they are scenic rivers, it may be illegal. There's another principle being ignored by such a proposition. A hurricane can push the waters of Lake Pontchartrain just as quickly in as it could drain the dredged channels. The idea of slab homes in flood zones has proven to be a costly mistake. And not only the owners of the slab houses, but the neighboring homes and subdivisions suffer. Roads also displace water and absorption. Albert Einstein, the first visionary who theorized the black holes that we saw this week and the event horizon, said something to the effect of, insanity is attempting the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Relaxing flood restrictions is sillier than that. I'm speaking for the residents of the parish. If the developers seek to change these rules, they'll be long gone when these homes and neighborhoods are flooded. Alexander Hamilton said, why have we formed a government in the first place? Because the passions of men will not conform to the dictates of reason. I think, personally, that we should call a moratorium in flood zones until we do the studies, until we are sure that the homeowners that we now have are protected. If the parish government doesn't do this, I hope the parish officials are the first ones on the scene when there's a flood with money and apologies. The developers will be long gone by then. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else?
My name is Ren Clark. I live in the often flooded Mandeville, 20 times in a pirogue off my front porch. Now I have one of the most successful crawfish farms south of Monroe Street. But what I heard from all sides...
Where do you live, sir? What's your address?
420 Carroll Street.
Okay.
But what was interesting to hear all the various comments was you're talking about water management. And the old line, if you can measure it, you can manage it. And I think the question is, what is our measurement? What is our basic metric? I mean, Mr. Engineer, the rational method, Q equals CIA. What's C? What's I? What's A? I think 3 engineers would come up with different answers. So I think one of the things to get a handle on is what data is available, how good is it, how can it be used? And then the set of eyes will all be using their brains, but they'll be looking at the same data. And hopefully that data is good. Because I've heard engineers from this parish office come and tell us in Mandeville our soils are all clay, so what's the big deal? Well, emphatically, the Soil Conservation Service says our soils are not clay. They're sand and silt and loam, and they take the water up very well. So that's my point about data. There's a lot of sources of information. The Natural Resource Conservation Service, which used to be the Soil Conservation Service, are masters at water management at the farm level. And I've worked with those boys from Nebraska to here to Australia for 30 years on that problem. How do you manage water on a farm? I don't see any difference. We're talking about a landscape, whether that's going to be a new Victoria's Secret superstore or a sugarcane field. You're still managing water, and that management is based upon data. And we have some of the most intriguing technologies anyone has ever seen. And if the survey community who's using it would share that with these folks, we could validate some of the maps that we have. So to me, it was interesting to hear, obviously, divergent views on how things should go, but talking about if you can measure it, you can manage it, how are we measuring going forward? That's my comment.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Anyone else? Mr. Shane.
Good evening, Jeff Shane of Covington. Short and sweet this evening. I have really 2 thoughts, one of substance, one as to process. As to substance, I appreciate the views that have been offered, and I would just say that from my perspective, I've probably never seen a science such as engineering that is more precise and exact. And in the same breath, I would say that I've never seen the practice of engineering and its application to be as diverse when you really get into individual projects and look at different situations. So that's my way of saying that the thing that I appreciated hearing tonight, I think from nearly everyone at the dais that spoke, was the openness toward perhaps looking at this as being not exact per se, but perhaps having some flexibility that will address the real applications of science in this situation. The other thing I'd like to comment to is to process. I have been around and been on a lot of work groups and committees in parish government for a long time. And I really respect the fact that this committee put aside their personal passions in the sense that although they were not afraid to speak their views, the collaborative effort that has been shown by this committee is really to be admired. And I'm going to lay a lot of that on the chairman, because I think a lot of that gets to leadership, but also the wisdom of not putting you in a position of having to vote on an item, but rather take your collective body of work and present it to the guys that get the big bucks, the council and let them debate it with the public, et cetera, but go through the process. So I really commend you for your thoughts, and hopefully this is the start of something good, maybe not just in the Phil area, but maybe as to how we develop and improve parish government practices.
Thank you, Jeff. Okay, I appreciate that, Jeff, and I know everyone on the committee does, but just to recap what we have so everybody's on the same page. We have the original amended version that Sydney first brought forth to the council and to the work group. That will be sent to the members of the council. You have my amendment to that that has the word strictly shall not in certain paragraphs. That will be sent to the council. We then have Mr. Fontenot's changes that he had made after some members, including myself, asked him to look at it. We have those amendments. That will be sent to the council. We have Mr. Martin's recommendations, and I'm going to ask somebody to look at that paragraph for you and shorten it so that we can discuss. Yeah, it's okay, yes. We'll have that sent to the council. We have Mr. Allen's comments on it, which will be sent to the council, and a couple of notes that I made will be included also. And then we have Mr. Marone's final amendment to it, using the word shall not with the exceptions added on. That will be sent to the council. So the council is going to be receiving a lot of information. Included in that, Ms. Couvillon will look at whether or not, I know Mr. Lagarde brought some interesting points on if the developer is the one paying the bill and not St. Tammany Parish, does it have to go out? But, we can discuss that as we go forward. But that needs to be looked at. So we have quite a lot of information going to the council. Now, let me just try to give you an idea about what I'm thinking. I want to have another public meeting on this subject to talk about everything that we just talked about that is going to the council. I want to be able to run through them all. I want everybody to be able to see it. I want everyone on this committee's opinion to come forward at that public meeting and discuss it. So we will have a public meeting of the council, public and a special council meeting. We'll do it all in one and take care of that. I'm going to try to do that next month, the beginning of the month, sometime in the beginning of the month. And we'll have that. And then, from then on, I will forward all the information to the council members. They're going to see the minutes, they're going to see the speakers, they're going to see everything laid out in front of them, and I really believe that they will come to the special council meeting, public meeting / public meeting, and they will be able to hear the public's input also on this subject. And then the council will start debating the issue. Now, I haven't been on the council that long, but I do know the process will not be at one council meeting. I can promise you that. And if it is, I'll buy everyone here a steak at a steakhouse, okay? But I can promise you that will not be the case. It will be a very deliberate, and it should be. It should be. This is important. So that's the process that I think we'll go through to finalize and move this forward. At the next council meeting next month, I'm going to update the council on where we are, and I'm going to ask the council, I don't know, Terry, if I have to ask the council, or I can do it myself. I can set my own committee up, I guess, okay. I'm going to inform the council then, rather better way to do it, is that we're going to form another work group. I'm going to send out an email to everyone that's on, Mr. Don is, and ask you to participate. And I'd like you to participate, everyone, because I believe it's very important. We started something, we all on board going in one direction, but now we need to look at those issues that everybody said. The data, how's it caused, what causes the whole 9 yards, and then try to make our decision by looking at the data and get that done. So that's where we're at right now. That's what we're going to do. And in closing, I just want to say once again, thank you. I really appreciate everyone's time, and I know how hard it is to get here, but I really thank you, and I know the people in St. Tammany Parish thank you. So thank you, and have a good night.